Hey guys, Ron here. Oh, I'm bathed in red, some of these brake lights. Okay, I'm going to be coming into the light in a minute. So tonight, folks, I'm going to be doing a video. I'm down here by the ocean. Hopefully there won't be a breeze or a wind. I'll try to talk extra loud in case there is when I'm there. I'm just going to show you the waves rolling in at night in the harbor at night. A lot of people don't do it. I love to do it. So another discussion video. I've just been too busy. I haven't been able to get in front of any locations, but I will be soon, I promise you. Anyway, so tonight I'm going to do this video and we're going to look at the scenery, and the subject is, was there a Kennedy curse? Joe Kennedy, patriarch of the Kennedy family, father of Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy. All of those men in that family had tragedy to one degree or another. And we're going to talk about it because the Kennedy curse was something, or if you believe in that sort of thing, was floated around in the 60s, early as I think the late 60s, for all the things that happened to, in particular, the Kennedy men. So we'll talk about it, and I'll try not to get run over here. So the Kennedys were a great American dynasty. The Kennedys are still involved in politics and in philanthropic things, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Bobby Kennedy himself had, I think 11 kids. In fact, Ethel was pregnant with one of his children when he was assassinated. But let's talk about, and I'll talk louder, hopefully there won't be wind, and I'll try to walk backwards if I can. The Kennedys. So, when the Kennedys first came to America, the first couple came literally husband and wife on what was called in those days coffin ships, because so many people died, being the poor Irish peasants that were coming after the potato famine, that they were dying in steerage. In fact, the first Kennedy did die very young. But I believe his son was P.J. Kennedy, if I have that right. And P.J. Kennedy actually made a name for himself in Boston and owned a saloon. And if I'm correct on the names and the dates, his son was Joseph P. Kennedy. And Joseph P. Kennedy, of course, became one of the richest men in America. He was famously a bootlegger during Prohibition. He was a very young bank president. He went to Harvard. He was in the movie business for quite a while and had many affairs, including with oh boy, I hate when the names escape me, but Queen Kelly. Oh boy, I'll tell you. I'm going to think of it, but Joe Kennedy's motto to his sons, including the future president of the United States, was bed as many women as you can, as often as you can. He literally said that to his sons. And his sons took it to heart, especially Joe Jr. and Jack and Teddy. We don't know so much about Bobby. He was a lot more Catholic, a lot more religious. And other than a possible dalliance with Marilyn Monroe, we don't know what Bobby Kennedy's extracurricular love life was, if any. He was sure busy with Ethel, though. Like I said, he was married forever, and he had 11 kids by the time he was 42 years old. So let's start at the beginning. So I told you about Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy being, like I said, all these different careers: bank president, bootlegger, movie business. Then Joe Kennedy wanted to get into politics. He became the ambassador to Court of St. James, England. But he and FDR had a very contentious relationship. In fact, it was one of these, it was a typical political thing. They made deals, backroom deals. And the last conversation I believe they had, FDR apparently threw him off his property because of things that Kennedy was saying and doing. Joe Kennedy, it's interesting because these days this would be applauded by certain members of the media and half the people in this country. But at that time, and I'm talking about the late 30s, especially when the war started in 1939, World War II, Joe Kennedy was ambassador to England, and he was just a little too enamored of Hitler. As a matter of fact, not only that, but he famously gave an interview where he was saying, I don't know what this is coming at me. Looks like an alien. I think it's people. So we're going to avoid that for a second. It's a alien, yes. So Joe Kennedy basically said that England was finished. He didn't believe England could survive Hitler in World War II, and that we should make peace with the Nazis, and there was a degree of admiration for Hitler by him. It certainly sounded that way. And he wasn't too sympathetic when Poland was invaded in 1939, which started the war. Joe Kennedy hated the idea of wars. He did not want his fortune to be messed with, and he thought it was the end of the world. He really did. And from that point on, he was known as the ambassador of appeasement. And that was the end of his political career. Like I say, now it would be a totally different thing. He'd probably be praised by the media and by many others as being non-confrontationalist, someone who didn't want to get involved in foreign wars. Of course, less than 2 years later, a little more than 2 years later, that war came to our shores in the name of Pearl Harbor. Anyway, so Joe Kennedy then put his sights on his sons. Now, his firstborn son, I would venture to say, was probably his favorite, Joe Kennedy Jr. Joe Jr. was handsome. He was athletic, cunning, brave, macho. He was everything that his father, Joe Sr., wanted him to be. And the next youngest brother, Jack, was actually much more quiet, more serious, very sickly for many, many years, definitely through his childhood, thin and sickly, and had a terrible back, and people thought Jack wouldn't make it, wouldn't live very long. Jack thought that himself. Apparently, until the invention of cortisone, he thought he was not going to make it to 40, which is another reason that apparently Jack claimed to live so wildly, because he thought he was going to die at any time. Anyway, and Jack was going to be a journalist. However, Joe Kennedy had great plans. He wanted Joe Jr. first to be president, then Jack, then Bobby, and then Teddy. But it didn't. Well, it could have almost worked out that way. So the war starts, and Joe is in the Navy. Joe Jr. is in, I believe, the Navy. Jack was in the Navy as well. And Teddy was too young. Remember what Bobby's participation in the war was? Bobby might have been too young as well at that point, but I'll have to do my research on that. So we got the two oldest brothers going off to war, and Joe Jr. is in the Pacific, and Joe Jr. is in England, in Europe, and Jack is in, and I'm calling him Jack because everyone called him Jack, even when he was John F. Kennedy, President of the United States. People called him Jack. So Jack was in the Pacific on a PT boat. You know the reason why Jack was in the Pacific? Because Jack was having an affair, just another conquest, with a woman named Inga Arvad, who the FBI was monitoring and thought she might have been a German spy, actually connected to Hitler himself. So J. Edgar Hoover loved to give this information to Joe. See, J. Edgar Hoover always had a thing for the Kennedys, and then he ends up working for them. So when Joe Sr., when Dad found out that Jack's lover was Inga Arvad, who Jack called Inga Binga, and that she might be a German spy, that the War Department said, oh, no way. So he got Jack transferred to the Pacific Theater, and basically that's how Jack became a war hero, all because of his dalliance with Inga Arvad. A lot of people don't know that. So Jack is on a PT boat, which they sensationalized and they made into a movie starring Cliff Robertson, PT 109. So during the war, Jack is on PT, this patrol boat, and he has a crew, and he's the commander of the ship. You see, he can be on the beach at midnight, certain times of year, and there'll always be people around. Winter, no. Summer, yes. Anyway, so the PT boat was struck, and Jack's behavior before the accident, before they were hit, was not commendable. In fact, people said that if he weren't a Kennedy, he might have been actually thrown out of the military for what he did. Some guys were asleep when they were supposed to be on watch. Things were not as shipshape as they could have been. They were too lax on the boat. However, Jack did do some heroic things, swimming to an island and bringing at least one of his shipmates with him. And the story is he literally swam with the guy's tow line in his teeth. I don't know if that's true, but it was quite a daring rescue, and Jack really was a hero. But what happened shouldn't have happened the way it happened had they been more prepared. Anyway, Jack becomes a hero, and Joe Kennedy loved publicity, so he knew that this would help. War hero would eventually help Jack's political ambitions. So they propped up the war hero thing in PT-109, the PT-109 incident, showing Jack as a hero. What is that? I don't know. Was out there everywhere, and before our time, all of us, obviously, but it was a big thing in the media. And reportedly, Joe Jr., the favorite brother, the oldest brother, was literally crying because he felt that Jack had sort of stolen his thunder. Joe Jr. wanted to be the only war hero in the family. So he took on a very, very dangerous volunteer mission. And the mission was that they were going to load I believe it was a cargo plane in England. They're going to load it with dynamite, TNT, all kinds of explosives, and they were going to fly it over Germany, and they were going to bail out, and they were going to have it crash into and explode V2 rocket plants and destroy this plant that was making the V2 rockets. And it was a very dangerous, very bold, and it, like I said, it was so dangerous. Not only was it classified, it was volunteer only, because they felt they couldn't order men to do this. It was too dangerous. So Joe Jr. took it up, and I think there were supposed to be 2 guys in the plane. And at the 11th hour, one of the guys said, he didn't think the electronics were working right in the plane. And he told Joe Jr., I don't think this is going to happen. I think this is very, very dangerous. And tell your commander, he'll understand. Just get out of it. And Joe Jr. couldn't back down from something he knew would make him what he believed the more heroic member of the Kennedy family. And he took it, and there was something wrong with the firing, the igniting, something with the electronics, and the plane blew up over the English Channel. And obviously before the 2 men could bail out, I think they called it the biggest explosion over the Channel the entire war. Obviously Joe Jr. and his pilot were killed instantly. And it was so devastating to Joe Sr. that he sat for a long time ensconced, listening to his classical music, and no one could mention Joe Jr. for the longest time. He was just too destroyed by it. He felt he was living vicariously through Jr. So, tragedy number 1. So, Joe Sr. pins his hopes next on the more quiet, sickly son, Jack. And Jack had to rise to the occasion. Also went to Harvard like his father. Also was an extreme womanizer like his father. And, Jack then ran for Congress. He and Nixon actually came up like the same way. Both came from the war, ran for Congress, then senator, and then obviously president. And we know what happened to Jack Kennedy, assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. And there are obviously many many theories regarding the assassination of President Kennedy. Personally, I think it was a mafia hit due to that would neutralize his brother Robert, the Attorney General, and it did. The Get Hoffa Squad, as it was called at the Justice Department, disbanded. The mafia prosecutions went way down to almost nothing, and then nothing. And then Bobby Kennedy did. He left the Justice Department a year later. He couldn't work with Hoover, and without Jack Kennedy backing him, without being de facto assistant president, he became senator. And when his brother Jack was killed, then obviously the mantle went to Bobby. And Bobby really didn't have any experience being a politician. He wasn't a congressman. He wasn't a senator. He was attorney general for his brother, highest law enforcement officer in the country, but he was a lawyer. A lawyer who actually had never practiced in a courtroom, but he was attorney general and very young, mid-30s. So Bobby becomes senator in 1964 of New York. He was from Massachusetts, but Teddy had taken Jack's seat, so New York was the only available when he won that. And then, as we know, Bobby ran for president in 1968, and it looked like he was on his way to getting the Democratic nomination, and he was gunned down under also mysterious circumstances. Now, Sirhan Sirhan, at the time of this filming, Bobby Kennedy's assassin, is still in jail, but there's never been a clear answer as to what happened to Bobby Kennedy. Obviously, I have some theories on that too. Many people said a security guard, a last-minute replacement, Thane Caesar, Ace Security Company, actually fired the bullets that killed Kennedy and RFK, and there's a lot of conspiracy around that and debate about that. I don't think in this day and age with cell phone videos, photos, internet, I don't think these mysteries would... I think these assassinations would have been solved. I don't think it would be possible to hide things like you could hide things in the 60s. Because number one, you had to people believed what the media, which was mostly newspapermen and TV and radio told them. Like I said, there was no, until Watergate, people didn't question politicians and the media and things like that. That's when it started. But what was really is the lack of, video footage or audio footage or things things like that, where now, there's cameras everywhere and sophisticated devices that National Security Agency and FBI uses and things of that nature. So I don't think these would go unsolved. I mean, they might say they're solved now, but I don't know. Then comes Teddy Kennedy. Teddy Kennedy probably would have fulfilled the role that he was supposed to fulfill anyway, although something he never wanted to take on. But Teddy Kennedy had been a senator from Massachusetts, as I said, for 7 years. And right around the time of the moon landing in July of 1969, the car he was driving, possibly not, there's conspiracies about that too, and a young female acquaintance named Mary Jo Kopechne, who we knew because she had worked on Bobby's campaign a year earlier. The car went over a bridge in Chappaquiddick and went into the water. Teddy was unharmed, and Mary Jo was trapped in the car and died. And basically, Teddy had to decide, and his team had to decide how to proceed from there, and whether it would ruin his political career. Now, supposedly he had said, even at that time, he never wanted it. His father didn't think he was able and ready, but he was expected to run in 1972, and he did not. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people say Chappaquiddick ruined Teddy's chances of being president. He did run in 1980, which is kind of odd because there was already a Democratic president, Jimmy Carter. He challenged his candidacy and did not even get the nomination. So maybe he just ran to satisfy the family. Who knows? But Teddy Kennedy is the one member of the family, the one male member of that generation that, other than Chappaquiddick, was sort of unscathed. I mean, his personal life, he suffered from alcoholism, and his wife Joan suffered from alcoholism, and one of his kids had cancer, and he himself had some health issues. But he lived into his 80s and he was a veteran senator when he died, so he kept getting reelected time and time again. So, in a weird way, the son most likely to achieve might have achieved the most. Now, let me back up and also say that while Jack was president, Joe Kennedy suffered, Joseph Kennedy Sr., the father obviously, suffered a massive stroke, which left him just about 100% incapacitated. And here was this powerful, powerful mover and shaker titan, a guy who could snap his fingers, get anything he wanted, women, money, power. And then he had this massive stroke on the golf course in 1961, I believe. And that was it. I mean, he was confined to a wheelchair. He had to depend on Rose, his wife, and obviously Rose knew and put up with the multitudes of affairs he had through the years, but didn't like it, but stayed as the wife and mother to her children. And now Rose is sort of in charge of that family in a way, but really spent a lot of time, Joe Kennedy, then with people taking care of him. So Joe Kennedy ended up the last 8 years of his life paralyzed and barely able to speak. And, you know, his hands were like claws, and apparently the grandchildren were scared of him when they'd go see Grandpa Joe. The patriarch of the family was now trapped in this body that couldn't speak and couldn't walk, couldn't barely speak, couldn't walk. And it's interesting because he didn't live too long after Chappaquiddick. It was said that he gave up after that. I believe he did literally give up, stop eating, and he knew probably Teddy would never be president, and that was the last hope he had of one of his sons being president. Other than Jack, obviously, who was cut down and assassinated before he could even serve his second term. How about the next generation? John Kennedy Jr., Jack's son. John Jr. was pressured to go into politics. Took him 4 times to pass the bar. He loved acting. Complicated guy. He was in, at the time of his death, a bad marriage that was not going well, and it was kind of a reconciliation for he and his wife's sister to go to the wedding of one of their cousins, actually one of Bobby's daughters. And again, recklessness. And I think reckless could be the word that describes the Kennedy men, especially. His foot was in a cast, and he took out his plane. He was flying at night, even though he was advised not to. He was advised to hug the coast so they could see their boundaries and where they were. Anyway, and the plane ended up plunging into the ocean, killing all three occupants. And another Kennedy tragedy. So that's 4 men, 20th century Kennedy men, dying by some sort of tragedy. Except for Teddy, like I said, who had his own spate of problems. So, was it a curse? The Kennedy women seemed to fare pretty much okay, except for their, philandering husbands. And Rosemary, the daughter who the Kennedys, I think that Joe Sr. didn't want to acknowledge. They said she became a nun, and actually Rosemary had a lobotomy that didn't go very well and was kind of in a mental hospital for quite a long time, I believe in Wisconsin. But she eventually did see and was visited and by her sisters as decades went on. But it seems to me like it's possible. Let me rephrase that. I'll ask the question. Do you believe in curses? Do you believe one of the Kennedys did something back in Ireland to offend the gods? Gods in, air quotes. Do you think that Joe Kennedy's behavior cursed the men in his family because of what a scoundrel he was? We don't know. Will we ever know? But what do you think? Do you think there was a curse? Do you think it was just victims of circumstance, coincidence? Anyway, let me know what you guys think. And thanks for hanging in there. And I hope there wasn't too much wind. I don't have to say what I always say, Please subscribe and keep up the likes, folks. It really propels the channel upward for new viewers. I really appreciate it. And I love your comments, and I will respond to them if it's something that makes sense for me to respond to. Let's put it that way. Okay, folks, I'll see you at the next location. Ron out. Bye-bye.